Allora, buon pomeriggio a tutti, mi sentite? Sì. Allora, io sono molto contento di ritrovarvi a quasi 2 mesi dall'ultimo nostro incontro mitteleuropeo e vi ringrazio come sempre per la vostra presenza. Questo di oggi, come forse sapete, è l'ultimo incontro del nostro ciclo e mi pare una chiusura significativa, intanto per il relatore che terrà l'intervento conclusivo, che è il professore Alois Woldan, di cui adesso la professoressa Laura Quercioli-Minzer ci racconterà tutto quanto e dialogherà con lui. Io vorrei solo ringraziarlo calorosamente per aver accettato il nostro invito e dire anche che si tratta di uno studioso di vaglia, uno studioso di prestigio della geografia culturale ebraico-mitteleuropea e mitteleuropea in generale nelle sue propaggini orientali, quindi la Galizia, la Bucovina e poi naturalmente la Volinia, la Podolia, la Rutenia, cioè i territori storici dell'Ucraina. E quindi mi sembra un intervento molto utile proprio alla fine di questo nostro viaggio attraverso le metropoli e attraverso le province dell'impero, proprio per riportarci a quei gangli della cultura ebraica mitteleuropea, tedescofona, ma anche slava, che perimetrano in qualche modo, se si può chiamare così forse con un ossimoro, la Mitteleuropa orientale, che è un paesaggio che sappiamo essere estremamente ricco dal punto di vista culturale e che ha esercitato influenze decisive a lungo percepibili anche in Occidente e che noi in qualche modo nel corso di questi mesi abbiamo tentato di mettere un po' a fuoco. E il tema di oggi credo sia queste dimensioni mitteleuropee dell'Ucraina, penso sia cruciale in forza così ai noi dei rilanci drammatici sul presente di cui siamo testimoni. E quindi penso che sia un tema che proprio a maggior ragione spinge oltre ogni omologazione culturale, oltre ogni uniformazione concettuale, quale che sia, a guardare anche a questa terra come impasto ricchissimo, densissimo, antichissimo di lingue, di culture, di tradizioni, che ha resistito per secoli a conflitti, a pulizie etniche, ai eccidi, in nome di varie ideologie. Quindi un luogo che è un intreccio di lingue, di culture, ma anche spesso di potenze, di prepotenze anche purtroppo. Quelle che sentiremo oggi sono forse storie magari di tempi forse lontani, ma bisogna tenerne desta la memoria anche per comprendere il dramma attuale. Basta così. Vorrei solo fare alcuni doverosi ringraziamenti, dato che siamo alla fine del nostro viaggio, ringraziamenti che sono sinceri, diciamo così, non formali. Ecco. Per primo al CEASUM, il Centro di Alti Studi Umanistici del Dipartimento di Lettere e Filosofia dell'Università di Trento, e al laboratorio Summit, che è il laboratorio di studi umanistici sugli scambi culturali in e con la Mitteleuropa, che è un'articolazione del CEASUM. Entrambe queste realtà, diciamo, che hanno generosamente supportato questo ciclo, e in particolare vorrei ringraziare il coordinatore, il direttore del ciclo, che è il del Centro di Alti Studi Umanistici, che è il professor Maurizio Giangiulio, e il professor Marco Vietta, che è il responsabile scientifico del seminario sulla Mitteleuropa. Ecco, senza il loro sostegno non avremmo potuto realizzare questa serie di lezioni. Dopodiché, con la stessa intensità, il mio ringraziamento va all'Associazione di Studi Ebraico-Tedeschi, ANT, che ha realizzato insieme a me, insieme al CEASUM, questo ciclo. In particolare vorrei ringraziare Claudia Sonino, Laura Quercioli, il direttivo, i soci, per i molti impulsi, suggerimenti che sono venuti in questi mesi, e soprattutto vorrei ringraziare la presidente dell'associazione, Roberta Scarelli, perché senza il suo contributo progettuale, ideativo, di visione, di prospettiva, nulla di quanto abbiamo fatto fin qui ci sarebbe. E grazie ancora ai 14 relatori si sono avvicendati in questi mesi, li nomino perché mi fa piacere in ordine temporale, sono Luis Kraus, Chaim Burstin, Franco Bezza, Anna Linda Callo, Giulio Schiavoni, Guido Massino, Marco Lovici, Alessandra Andolfo, Michaela Lattini, Stefano Franchini, Andreina Lavagetto, Lorella Bosco, Gabriele Guerra, Klaus Davidovic e, dulcis in fundo, Alois Woldan. Quindi sono loro che hanno permesso da giugno in avanti a questo ciclo di snodarsi attraverso 11 mesi. La sostanza è tutta loro, perché sono loro che hanno riempito di contenuti questo itinerario tematico. E da parte mia e da Roberta Scarelli, da penultimo, va un grazie molto sentito alla segreteria del Centro di Alti Studi Umanistici, soprattutto a Ivana Pasquazzo e a Caterina Giannatasio, e allo staff organizzativo di Dipartimento e informatico, in particolare a Luca Valenzin, a Anna Pallaver e a tutti gli studenti collaboratori che con competenza e con precisione hanno fatto sì che questo ciclo potesse svolgersi senza intoppi tecnici. Basta, hanno creato anche questo repository, questa pagina dove sono YouTube, dove sono contenute tutte le registrazioni dei nostri incontri. E proprio per ultimo, un grazie, per ultimo ma non per importanza, ecco, un grazie molto caloroso a tutti i molti partecipanti che ci sono stati in questi mesi, colleghi, studenti, dottorandi, amici, ostaggi, che ci hanno tenuto compagnia, che ci hanno seguito con costanza e con affetto, e senza i quali avremmo parlato nel vuoto, quindi grazie davvero. E tra qualche mese, come forse vi avevamo già detto, uscirà un libro che raccoglie gli interventi del ciclo insieme ad altri contributi, ed è un esito di cui io e Roberta, che siamo i curatori, siamo molto contenti, e che prelude forse, chi lo sa, un altro ciclo il prossimo anno, ma sono cose del futuro, vedremo. Intanto io ringrazio ancora tutti quanti, cedo la parola a Roberta per un saluto, e poi subito dopo a Laura Percioli. Grazie a tutti.
Grazie Massimiliano. Credo che sia un compito molto bello quello di associarsi ai ringraziamenti alla fine di un periodo che mi sembra sia stato intenso, piacevole, ricco di suggestioni, di interventi, di figure, di facce, di persone, di domande. È stato un percorso che abbiamo costruito insieme, nella prospettiva di dare voci intanto italiane e straniere ai temi della Mitteleuropa, ma anche perché, trovandoci di fronte a una dimensione geografica, linguistica e culturale così ampia, la Mitteleuropa ebraica, come sapete, è un ampissimo continente, abbiamo cercato senza pretese di esaustività di indagare temi diversi, prospettive diverse, tradizioni diverse. E penso che grazie ai molti relatori che ci sono stati, con le loro voci, con le loro tradizioni culturali, con le loro lingue, con le loro esperienze, siamo riusciti, se non altro, a dare un'immagine della vastità del tema, dell'intreccio di problemi, di tematiche e di canoni diversi. Credo che sia un'esperienza almeno secondo me è un'esperienza riuscita. La collaborazione con Massimiliano, con l'Università di Trento è stata fondamentale, nel senso che abbiamo lavorato con Massimiliano molto bene insieme. È stato un rapporto facile e felice, cosa che non succede sempre, perché siamo due persone poi in fondo curiose e molto appassionate per tutto quello che riguarda lo studio e la conoscenza di questo mondo, e spero che questo sia passato. La passione, l'impegno e l'idea di andare a fare dei sondaggi, un po' da rabdomante forse, ma un po' d'acqua qui e lì è emersa. Grazie a tutti i relatori che hanno partecipato, che hanno reso possibile e vivo questo ciclo. Grazie a tutti i colleghi che sono stati presenti, hanno fatto domande, hanno mandato poi lettere. Un grazie speciale ai tecnici dell'Università di Trento, che sono stati meravigliosi, e considerata il nostro analfabetismo mi sembra abbastanza diffuso per quanto riguarda la possibilità di collegarci, sono stati veramente fondamentali, oltre che preziosi. Sono felice che questo viaggio sia provvisoriamente finito, ora avremo il tempo per riflettere. Il libro di cui parlava Massimiliano ci aiuterà anche a vedere come se, in che prospettiva continuare a interrogarci sulla Mitteleuropa, anche se da quando abbiamo incominciato ad oggi la Mitteleuropa vuol dire qualche altra cosa. La Mitteleuropa non è soltanto il terreno delle guerre, ma anche il terreno di altre nazionalità, di altre prospettive sulla modernità. Vedere se e quanto noi riusciamo poi anche ad affrontare questa prospettiva. Un grazie affettuoso a tutti e do la parola a Laura Minzel che conduce questa giornata, oltre ad aver condotto molte riflessioni e molti progetti. Prego Laura.
Grazie Roberta, grazie Massimiliano. I'll switch to English since we are already having some guests, not Italian speakers, and I'm very glad to see them. We have Judith Bomer from New York, Alina Molisa from Warsaw, Eva Berard from Paris, sorry, and maybe some others, I don't know. We have here also Anna Taudol, she disputed recently her PhD on Ukrainian history, so Anna, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I speak very briefly. I have to tell you that even if the technicians of the University of Trento are wonderful, we are because Professor Woldan couldn't switch on his camera. And it's a pity because Alois Woldan is a handsome man, but well, if you don't know him directly, you have to believe me. Now you will be able to see only his slides. Another technical point at the end of the presentation, if you want to make to speak about something, you'll have you can write just something in the chat, and then you can personally switch on the video camera. That's all, I think. Now I'll just read something about Alois Woldan biography, something that you already know because it's in the mail that we sent, but just as a reminder. And then before we begin, I have the permission of Alois Woldan. I put him a question just to introduce the general theme. Okay, Alois Woldan is Professor Emeritus at the Institute of Slavistics at the University of Vienna. He studied theology, Slavic and comparative literature at the University of Innsbruck, where he received his PhD. Then in Voronesh, Russia, he was a lecturer in linguistics at Mosca University. He then taught at the Department of Slavic Studies at the University of Salzburg, German and Austrian culture at the University of Wrocław in Poland. Until 2020, full professor of Central European and East European Studies at the University of Vienna. His areas of research are the history of Polish and Ukrainian literature, the literature of Austrian Galicia, and poetic translation from Polish and Ukrainian into German. Among his publications, the Österreich-Mythos in the Polish literature, published in 1996, Europa Erlesen, Lemberg, published in 2008, Beiträge zu einer Galician Literatur, published in 2015, and the last title is a translation of Lina Kostenko's poems, Ich bin alles das, was lieb und wert mir ist. That was published last year. So thank you, Professor Woldan. And this is my question. We are used to identifying the concept of Mitteleuropa as that complex of relations and cultural interchanges that essentially came into being in the ambit of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire at its decline, and which is based on German-Jewish relations. But here, you propose an image of Central European paradigms that first of all included the so-called third wheel, the Slavs, and then have not only geographical, but also much wider temporal margin. Is this so? And is this a demonstration that the concept of Mitteleuropa is not something dusty and outdated, but has possibilities for expansion and regeneration? Alois, it's up to you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Once more, I beg your pardon for my technical mischief. I bought me a new camera, but nevertheless, it does not work, so you cannot see me. That's not as bad. But nevertheless, the main thing is my presentation. You can see and my voice to comment on it. You can hear, at least that is. And already I'm answering to Laura's question, what's about the notion of Galicia. I do not use it in the sense Kundera invented it, if we can say so, to regain a lost space between the East and the West when the Iron Curtain was still working. But I'm trying to enlarge it into the historical, back into history, as you already mentioned. That means the early modern ages and the late medieval ages, but it's more or less, I would like to say, the same geographical space, which later became part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. It was former part, not completely the same, but to a large degree, of the Rzeczpospolita Narodów, of the Polish Republic. That means that this Middle Europe is essentially a part of Europe, of the Occidental world too. So it has, I would like to say, a kind of strict border to the east, but not to the west. This Middle Europe, as it will come out of my presentation, has a border to the east, but not to the west. So I think I would like just to start and in this way give a more detailed answer on the question what my Middle Europe is like. Yes, I'm starting with a part of the Kievskaya Rus, the counties of Halič and Volodymyr, which were sometimes together and which formed the southwestern extension of the Kievskaya Rus. And these two counties, they lasted longer. You see, official date of the fall of Kievskaya Rus is 1240. De facto, it lasted longer, but nevertheless, counties of Halič and Volodymyr lasted as counties of their own until 1360. Then they were included or occupied by the Polish king Casimir III. We have some features in this Halič-Volodymyr region that are typically for Middle European culture and differ very strongly from Eastern European Russian culture. We can see this, for example, in the culmination of the last mighty ruler, that was Danilo Romanovich, the first crowned king. Already this is an issue which only happened here in this western district, that the Pope gave a king's crown to an reigner, which he deposed him as Rex Russia. That does not mean, of course, Russia in the modern sense, but this is the Kievskaya Rus. First thing, a crowned king, crowned by the Pope. Second, founder of the city of Lviv, which was named after his son Lev. City culture, urban culture, is a very specific phenomena of this southwestern extension of the Kievskaya Rus. It is an urban culture based on, for example, Magdeburg law. That means on burghers' ability to decide. A senate of burghers deciding on the matters of the city. That's the typical Western institution. That's Magdeburg law, very much widespread in central Middle Europa. Krakow and so on, all these cities had Magdeburg law. It was the seat of an archbishop, a metropolitan seat. Interesting too, because a counterpart to the transfer of the seat of the metropolitan to Vladimir and then to Moscow. We can learn a lot on Alois Vladimir from the Galician Volhynian Chronicle, which again, among the old Kiev chronicles, has a special character because it is more a biography of a king than a chronicle in a typic sense. Here we have even Austrian episodes, as this were called, when Danilo, together with the Hungarian king, entered in, contested the heritage of the first dynasty of the Babenbergers. That's an episode, had no larger consequences, but nevertheless, it shows us, and the whole Galician Volhynian Chronicle shows us how intertangled this Alois Vladimir was into Hungarian and Polish, that means Middle European history. Yeah, Ukrainian scholars in medieval universities, Neo-Latin poets, that's again, I think, a proof of this entangledness, interwovenness of Ukrainian culture with Central European culture. Ukraine, and especially the city of Drohobych, is proud of Yuri Kotermak, Georgius Drohobitzensis, di Russia, a scholar who studied at the Krakow Academy, then moved to Italy. He was once even rector of Bologna University. He came back to Krakow, where he died. The most famous work he left is Judicium Prenosticum, kind of disposition for the year 1483. He was a magician and he was astrologer in the same person. Another case, not very famous, is Jans Turubina, a specialist of canonic law at Krakow University or Academy. His main work is Enchiridion Juris Pontifici et Caesaris. When he published his Latin written works, he used the name of Rutenus, Johannes Turubinius Rutenus. Rutenus or Roxolanus in other cases shows Ukrainian origin. Nevertheless, he may, until now, is more or less a part of Polish culture, but these persons coming from the eastern regions like to lose this Rutenus. And this is still more the case with Paulus Grosner, Paulus Grosnensis Rutenis or Roxolanus. He is a poet. Usually you can find him in the history of Polish literature in the humanistic period. He only wrote in Latin. His only book that he edited was edited in Vienna, Panegyricativum Ladislarum Pannoni Regem, etc. In this book, we find more allusions to Hungarian history than to Polish or not all to Ukrainian history, but nevertheless, also born in Krosno, which is not immediately was seen in Ukrainian territory, he uses in his Latin works the name Rutenus or Roxolanus. Yeah, this is the same case in the 16th century. In the 17th century, we have got a couple of persons known from the history of Polish literature and culture, but using pseudonyms as Orychowius, Roxolanus, or Rutenus. The most famous is Orzechowski. Orychowski, he wrote in Latin and in Polish. At least one of his texts, Baptismus Rutenorum, is a very specific one because it's a pledging for the equal validity of the Byzantine rite of baptism. It's a little more complicated with Klonovitz. We have no indications on his Ukraine origin, but one major written in Latin itinerary is devoted to the region of the Rus Chervona. That means this region from Halič up to Lviv and then to Lublin, with excursions to the west and to the east. He is more known as the author of the Polish travelogue Fleece to Puszczanie statków Wisą. Similar is the case with Zimerovich, who was probably of Ukrainian origin, Ozimek, but he was a Polonized then person, wrote his poetry in Polish, but his scientific works, as the famous history of the city of Lviv, in Latin. The term of Renaissance, Vidrogenia, introduced by the famous Ukrainian historian Mikhail Rushevsky, is once again an issue typical for Central and European culture, not for Eastern European culture. It's interesting that Ukrainian culture has got a renaissance, but there is no Ukrainian state at this time. The renaissance of a culture is located in cities which belong to the Polish state. It is first of all Ostrich, second Lviv, which are in this border territory, the Pogranicze, it's called in Polish, the Polish-Ukrainian borderland, and then it's third in Kiev, which is of course farther to the east. Maybe just to concentrate on the second of the center, on Lviv, by picking out a literary sample of the production of the Lviv Brotherhood. At this time, about 1580 to 1620, the Lviv Brotherhood played an important role. Rich merchants being engaged into church affairs. They founded a school with a very high level. They had a publishing institution founded, and they erected buildings to be seen until now, the famous Uspenská Cerkva. From one of these books, from the grammar book Adelphotes, Church Slavonic Greek grammar book, comes this heraldic poetry, this coat of arms of the city of Lviv, combined with the coat of arms. The tower is the coat of arms of the Brotherhood. This double coat of arms is a part of an emblematic construction that consists of inscriptio, Leopolis, here still written in Greek, then pictura, the coat of arms, and then subscriptio, this beautiful text. I won't comment on him much longer because time doesn't allow it. But just two things. Heraldic poetry is typical for the Polish literary production of the late Renaissance and early Baroque. We know, for example, the famous collection of Bartosz Paprocki, Herby, Rycerstwa Polskiego. Depends, of course, on the situation, on the mightiness of the Polish nobility. The tradition of emblematic poetry is an European one, it's an Occidental one coming from the antique culture via the Middle Ages to Renaissance and Baroque culture. So these features being present in Ukrainian culture at the turn of the 16th century show us again this involvedness, this entangled character of Ukrainian culture with Central European culture. Yeah. Later, more than 100 years later, is Ivan Mazepa one of the most famous persons in Ukrainian and history, and the most famous Ukrainian in European culture and in European literatures. I want to concentrate on Mazepa's biography. It's sketched here in a few short remarks. Most important thing Mazepa did, he tried to free Ukraine from the Russian yoke. Since Khmelnytsky, 1654, large parts of the Ukraines were subdued to the Moscow Tsardom. And this condition became worse and worse. It became a real yoke, and Mazepa, at the end of his life, being already about 70 years, tried to free Ukraine from this Moscow influence and to form an independent Ukrainian state. So we can regard this attempt, a sacred treaty with Charles XII, King of Sweden, as an attempt of Ukrainian nation building, and not state nation building, but state building. It was an attempt to create an independent Ukrainian county, at least. This attempt was not successful. The defeat of Charles XII, together with Mazepa at Poltava against Peter I, ended this idea of freeing Ukraine from Russian power, Russian influence. Mazepa went to exile in Bender, there in the Turkish Empire, nowadays in Transnistria, where he died in the same year of the defeat. An interesting argument that Mazepa uses in a letter to the Austrian emperor. Mazepa tried to get the dignity of a count of the Holy Roman Empire, and this dignity could be given by the Habsburg emperor at this time, Joseph II. Joseph I. He ruled for a very short time. And here it's an interesting argument. I'm quoting only the English translation. Mazepa and his Cossacks had always detained heretic Tatars and other enemies of Christianity effectively from Christian borders, and will be ready in future to serve as a bulwark of Christianity whenever needed. A bulwark of Christianity against non-Christian forces. This is the argument of the Antemurale Christianitatis. We know it very well from Hungarian and especially from Polish history in the early New Ages. So again, a mere Central European notion used by an Ukrainian hetman to prove his belonging to that Occidental European world. As you know, Mazepa has become the hero of a lot of literary works, from Byron's poem Mazepa, via Hugo's Mazepa, Pushkin's Poltava, Slovatsky's Mazepa, and so on and so on. This picture shows you that Byron had a large impact on French Romantic painting. This is a painting by Géricault, showing Mazepa tied to the horse. He was punished by being tied to a horse, and then this horse, according to Byron, it was running 3 days and 3 nights from Russia to the Ukraine. Here the Dnipro, and that's important, the horse and Mazepa bound to this horse have to cross the river Dnipro to get from the Occident to the Orient. For Mazepa, this bath in the river is a kind of rebirth. On the left bank of the Dnipro River begins his new career as the hetman of the Cossacks. We had epigrams of the Mazepa plot in German literature. They are now forgotten. I won't concentrate on this any longer. interesting in these treatments is the fact that these authors, what concerns the plot, they are following Pushkin's Poltava. But what concerns the interpretation of Mazeppa's person, they follow another way, and they see Mazeppa as a leader who could be able to free Ukraine, to establish an Ukrainian state. They see him in a positive light, which is absolutely not the case in Pushkin's Poltava. Yeah, Mazeppa has left an impact in Italian culture too that is not very known, but nevertheless, I found at least one ballad, 2 operas, and one historical text, Mazeppa Romanzo Storico, not really examined until now, but that's proof again that the Mazeppa plot is present in Italian culture too, and more still that Mazeppa, more or less because of his literary career, has a fixed place in Europe, in Western Europe, English, French, Italian culture and literature. Let's now come to Galicia and to, I would like to say, another history of Ukraine. Why? From the 18th century, we have history of Ukraine in 2 narratives. We have the narrative of the Little Russians in Tsarist Empire, and we have the narrative of the Ruthenians in Habsburg Empire. We have got no Ukrainian state, neither in the East nor in the West, but we have got 2 narratives of Ukrainian history from this point on. A survey of Galician history shows us that Ukrainian history and culture is entangled into all these historical data. When the Austrians re-established the University of Lviv in 1784, at the same time there was founded the Greek Catholic General Seminary. And for the clergies, there was established a kind of studium rotanum to help them who were not able to follow lessons in Latin or in German, to help them to do this program in their own language. November uprising did not actually take place in Galicia, but there was a large wave of sympathy in Galicia. And there were Polish students crossing the border from Galicia to the territory of the uprising, and there were Ukrainian students joining Polish combatants. The year of 1848 shows us that interests now start to differ. In the situation of the Spring of Nations, the Polish party in Lviv established a National Council, Rada Narodowa, and this council addresses a petition to Vienna containing large demands of autonomy. At the same time, a little later, there is a Ruthenian council being formed, Holovna Ruska Rada, and this council addresses a petition too, containing much less severe ideas of autonomy. First of all, of a language autonomy for the Ruthenians. This language autonomy was given in 1867, but it was given in favor of Polish language and Polish culture, and the leaving Polish part of the inhabitants did not pass over this autonomy to the Ruthenian parts of the inhabitants. So from this time, this autonomy is the beginning of a period of Polish domination in Galician culture, in Galician administration, in Galician cultural life. More or less at the same time, Austria introduces parliamentarian system. That means in all the crown countries, regional parliaments are established. In Galicia, there is a same, using the old Polish word for parliament, established. And in this same, we have already Ukrainian deputies too. Still of more importance are Ukrainian deputies in the central Viennese Diet, in the Reichsrat. This is a school for learning parliamentarian system for Poles and for Ukrainians. The years, especially from 1870 to the end of the monarchy, in the Viennese parliament. Many of the deputies before World War I, then Poland played leading roles in Polish administration of the Second Republic after 1980. And last but not least, and this will be explored in the next slides, when World War I broke out, we had Polish armed forces and we had Ukrainian armed forces, the siege riflemen within the Austrian army. This would be a sketch backwards to the Ukrainian Romanticism in Galicia, the famous collection of Rusalka Dnistrova. Only one word, it shows that here literary reawakening, the kind of second rebirth, Ukrainian culture in Galicia within the context of Middle-European pan-Slavism. You see, beside collection of folk songs, we have here translation that this is first of all Karadzic, Narodne Piesme, and this is the famous Czech falsifications, Kralobotvorska, Rukopis, and so on. But back to the historical development, that would be still not historical development, slide showing you that all this Galician reality is reflected in fiction, be it the year 1848, Sacher-Masoch's novel The Igloo, for example, be it the situation in 1867 or in afterwards. We have got Jewish authors like Sacher-Masoch or Franzos writing in German. We have got Poles like Jan Lam and so on, Balutsky, and we have got here on the other side Ukrainian authors, first of all, Ivan Franko, who has left an enormous work, 6-7 large novels, and the main thing in this novel is this is a Polish-Ukrainian conflict deriving from the situation in Galicia. But now to a crucial moment, to World War I outbreaking in 1914. And here Poles and Ukrainians are in a very similar situation because they are fighting on both sides of the frontier. Millions in uniforms of the Tsarist army and 700,000 in Austrian uniforms. Both Poles and Ukrainians built hopes on the victory of the Axis power. If Austria-Germany would manage to defeat Russia, there would be a possibility of either rebuilding the Polish state or erecting a kind of more or less independent Ukrainian country within the Habsburg monarchy. Both nations had civil organizations dealing to make the public opinions in favor of the Polish Ukrainians. we have got, for it's here we have abbreviations, the Polska Organizacja Wojskowa, or on the other side, Soyuz, or in the Ukraine, the Union for freeing the Ukraine. And the core thing we have, as I already mentioned, armed national units within the Austrian German armies, Polish legions, Ukrainian siege riflemen. The name siege refers to the Cossack tradition. The siege was the isle in the lower Dnipro River, destroyed by Katarina in 1775, where the Cossack administration was concentrated. Last but not least, both of these military institutions left an echo in literature. Polish literature knows the Poesia Legionova, and Ukrainian history of Ukrainian literature knows the Strilecka Poesia. Yeah, the two of a leading Habsburg branch were immediately engaged to the political speculations connected with the end of World War I. Here I'm pointing out Wilhelm von Habsburg, Vassil Vyshevany, as the Ukrainian called him. He was commander, political leader, and he should be the Duke of an independent Ukraine if World War I had been won by the Axis powers. He died tragically in a Kiev jail in 1948. He was captured in Vienna, then being a completely private person, taken to Kiev, tortured, and he died in jail. He had to pay a high price for the hopes Austrian people had led on him. His father, no picture here, Karl Stephan, from the Silesian branch of the Habsburg, was designed King of Poland. In 1960, the Austrian, the German emperor and the Austrian young emperor Karl agreed to rebuild a Polish kingdom, and this father of Wilhelm, Karl Stephan von Habsburg-Lothringen, was designed Polish king. He never became it, of course, but there were speculations. Yes, and not very, rather a tragic side of Ukrainian entanglement into Central European history war refugee camps in Austria and Germany. I am here drawing your attention to an Austrian camp in Gmünd, that's Lower Austria, not far from today's Czech border. These camps were necessary because a lot of civil popularization in Galicia was evacuated. First of all, women and children. Men had to serve in the army. They were evacuated because their villages were in the frontier region, so they had to leave this for some years. This camp at Gmünd was planned for maximum 30,000 persons, but it was inhabited by until 100,000 inhabitants, and there were very tragic circumstances. A lot of people died. It's very a tragic page of Austrian-Ukrainian history. Another page of the situation after World War I is the Ukrainian immigration in Austria, in Vienna first of all, in the years immediately after World War I. Vienna for a short time became a center of Ukrainian immigration. This immigration then moved on to Prague, where the President Masaryk had a more understanding for the needs of East Slavic refugees. In Vienna, we had politicians of the Western Ukrainian National Republic, which was destroyed in 1919 by Polish armies. We had scientists like Ruzhevsky, who founded the Free Ukrainian University in Vienna in 1921, which then moved on to Prague and then to Munich, where it is still acting today. It was, besides, maybe the first pure Ukrainian university at all, because universities in Kharkiv and Kiev had been very much Sovietized and Russianized. We had in Vienna publishing houses, journals, newspapers that appeared. And there are listed some titles of publications by leading Ukrainian politics, for example, Lepinsky, ambassador to Vienna, or Krushelnitsky, writer and at this time Minister of Education of the Kiev Ukrainian National Republic, and so on. Last position is a poet, Alexander Oles, who from Vienna moved then further on to Prague. He published a collection of poems, Chujinoyo, in a foreign country, and illustrates all these publications were published in Vienna. And the picture illustrating the title page is very characteristic. It's a man who has dropped down his bandura no more times of singing. He is disappointed mourning. Because the situation in a foreign country is most disappointing without an exit. The same situation repeated in Austria after World War II. It means 30 years later. There's the only difference that Ukrainian emigration did not concentrate in Vienna. That was too dangerous because of the Red Army occupying Vienna, or a sector of Vienna too. But displaced person camps inhabited mainly by Ukrainian population were opened in Salzburg, in Bavaria, Berchtesgaden, in the Tyrol. And there was an active, again, literary and cultural life. We have something of the publications left, and we can from these publications conclude on the activities, schools, choirs, theater groups, and so on. The illustration shows the journal Letterature, the dramas. Only 4 numbers were edited in Novitny, Salzburg, in new days. It was the publishing house called. It was edited and then organized by Oswald Burkhardt. Oswald Burkhardt is a double identity as Yuri Kelen. He was a poet, a member of the Kiev neoclassical group. As a child of the Romanian Germans, he had a double identity, and he worked in the interwar period as a professor at Münster University, and after World War II for a short time at Innsbruck University. In Salzburg he edited this literary, scientific, cultural journal. A few years later again, the mainstream of Ukrainian emigration moved from Innsbruck, Salzburg, Austria, towards Munich, Bavaria. Augsburg and Munich became the new centers of the Ukrainian immigration in the 1950s, 1960s, and from there a lot of persons went overseas to join the diaspora in the United States, in Canada, and so on. Yes. My last word without any slide. We are facing a third wave of Ukrainian immigration in these days, and we still don't know how long this wave of immigration will leave in Austria, and how Austria will be able to propose good conditions to these people having come within the difficult situation now. That's all I would like to say. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Woldan. Can you hear us? We hear a noise. Probably you have the volume too loud. Your PC.
Yes, I'm here. I hear. If there are any questions, I'm glad to answer to them if I can.
We cannot hear you.
You cannot hear me?
There is a problem with the loud.
Is it better now?
Yes, it is too loud, but you should try to make it less loud.
Too loud?
Too loud.
Too loud, okay.
Okay.
Laura, tu senti?
Laura, sì. Giuliano, qualche
Sì,
collega
io ci
di
sono.
Trento
Ci
che
sono,
possa
solo che,
darci una
che
mano.
sento tutto un fischio terribile.
Sì.
E ho cambiato computer pensando che dipendesse dal mio computer,
Così
ma
va bene. Così
anche
va
adesso mi
bene.
sono messa vicino al coso. Oh,
Eccoci.
cosa è successo?
Si sente meglio adesso.
Bene, che cos'era?
Non lo sapremo mai, Laura.
Okay. Alois, you are still there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, but today is something, I don't know. And now it should be working.
But could you hear my presentation?
Yeah,
Yes.
very well.
Yeah, but the last minutes were very disturbed, but just the last minutes.
Disturbed. It's a pity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. You may go on.
Yes, no, I have finished already.
Ah, okay. So I just didn't hear the last
no,
words.
enough. Not too long, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe you could close the condivision.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we are very much looking forward for everybody who wants to put questions to Professor Woldan. Okay. Alina Molisak writes, thank you for such an interesting lecture on history. Could you tell us something about when the myth of Galicia emerges and who are its creators? Does it exist in Ukrainian culture, as in Polish or Jewish culture? And Alina, if you want to switch on your video.
It's already switched on.
Are you here, Laura?
Ecco, okay, ciao, cześć.
Pleased to see you, yes.
Nice to see you. Świetnie.
What concerns the notion myth of Galicia, myth of Galicia in Ukrainian culture, it is a late phenomenon. It's it arrived after the turnover after 1991 in independent Ukraine, and it was created really in a very creative way in literary fiction, not in historical reconstruction, but in literary construction based on elements of historic tradition. So more creative maybe than it was handled in Polish culture, where it was merely a matter of historians, and then the literary authors took over this. In Ukrainian culture, as far as I remember, it was first a matter of literary fiction, and then secondarily, historians added this discourse and wrote on Galicia, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the idea of Galicia, Habsburg Political Culture by Alois Woldan. Yes, I know this book. This book is interesting, you see, because Wolf is the first to point out that Galicia is a construct and it is an idea which was then more and more realized in political and administrational praxis. That's interesting. That's in the interesting thesis of Larry Wolf. If you know his book, I think the samples he provides are not as convincing as they could be. There's more material showing this replacement of the idea in reality than Larry Wolf gives. For example, anthologies from the first half of the 19th century containing Polish and Ukrainian poetry under one name. This is not Polish and Ukrainian, this is Galician now, literature. There's one Galician folk. This is very interesting. And these samples can still better illustrate Larry Wolf's thesis than the samples he brings in his book. But he is absolutely right. It was an idea of Austrian officials, combination of two territories which had never been together. They had been part of the Polish Rzeczpospolita, of course, but they had never been together in an administrative unit. Malopolska and Rus Czerwona. This was first brought into one administrative unit by Austrian administration, and this had been given a kind of legitimation, and this idea legitimizing has, with some problems, being introduced and being realized in political praxis. And this is a very, very fascinating thesis by Larry Wolf.
Mm-hmm. Judith, maybe you want to intervene again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, sorry, I can't open my video. C'è prima lei, c'è una domanda prima da parte di Judith Baumel.
Judith, credo che I can't open my video. Credo che Alois abbia già risposto alla domanda di Judith.
Judith is suggesting a book in English called The Idea of Galicia, History and Fantasy in Habsburg Political Culture. The author is Larry Wolf.
Yes, yes.
And I think it's a very good suggestion. Thank you, Baum.
Yes. Should I repeat what I have said already? Nice.
A couple of years ago, Alois, I attended on Zoom a lecture by Magdalena Waligórska, whom you surely know, and with the team, she was doing a research on Polish, Belarusian, and Ukrainian borders in former shtetl and in little towns, also researching how the people who live there are perceiving themselves culturally. And she said that just if I well remember, just in the last period, and it was a couple of years ago, just in the last period in Ukraine, are all the memories of the Austrian Empire are resurging are just a treasure for everybody who can find just a trace of the former Austrian presence there. And this was helping in a way to rebuild, was shaping a new auto-perception of at least this part of the Ukraine. What do you think about this, if you know anything about this and so on? And sorry, the Austrian memory is also the Jewish Austrian memory.
Yes, you are absolutely right. It is a relatively new phenomenon. After the turnover after 1901, this heritage is being discovered, And this is an element of identity building now. That's absolutely right. You find it in trivial ways, but in names of restaurants, of bars, of drinks, and so on. A wave of Galician triviality, we could say, in the Western Ukrainian within the last 10 years. But the background is reconstructed, is the common heritage, which is again present, but this is very in a very creative manner reworked. It is shifted and reworked in a very creative manner. I saw here, I see in chat, John Chaplitska, A City in the Cross Currents of Culture. Yes, I have got a contribution in this book. I know this book, yes. Amas, Paradox of Ukrainian Leaf, I don't know, I can't comment on it. Yeah, Deborah Vogel is an interesting case because she's one of the few Yiddish writing authors in Lviv. There are not so many. There is Mendel Neigroschel, as far as I know, and some more, but Alina knows better than me, of course. She knows she will correct me afterwards. Most of Yiddish, of Jewish authors in Austrian Galicia wrote German or Polish. And a few of them are not very, very known. For example, Strykovsky, I think he's a very interesting author, but only at his beginning he wrote a little in Yiddish, but then he only used Polish, and his biography, his work is very, very interesting for the history of Galician, Polish, and Ukrainian Jewish culture. He was a communist, and now he is more or less forgotten, but I think he should not be forgotten. Krakow publishing house, Austeria, is known by one of his novels. Yeah, modernist writing in Polish and Yiddish. I could just add one Jewish author from Brody, a really modernist author, but he wrote in German, not in Polish and Yiddish. But we have got, of course, what concerns Jews, modernists represented in Polish. If you, Wierzyński was of Jewish origin, of course, he's a famous, one of the most famous Polish poets, and of course, not to mention Bruno Schulz, of course. He is a modernist author too, and he's of Jewish origin and one of the leading authors of in Polish literature in the interwar period in general. So there could be, there's a lot of names to be mentioned, but for me, more interesting are persons not so prominent as Bruno Schulz, for example. A lot of books are written on Schulz. Deborah Vogel is much less known, but there was still, for example, the group of authors from Brody as Herzberg Frankl is more known, but Hermann Menges is practically not known, a very interesting author in the sample of Viennese modernism, but he wrote in German only. Oh yeah, I see.
Okay. So here, thank you again, Judith, for all the reading suggestions. We'll have a lot of work to do. I haven't read it yet, but I think in this realm, I even if it speaks of a later period, I could suggest also Ola Hnatiów, the courage and odwaga I jak to jest, Alinko?
Zaraz ci sprawdzę.
Odvaga i strach je batak. The Courage and the Fear. It's been published also in English and is on open access on somewhere.
Excellent book. It's excellent book from Ola Knatuk.
And so we have many indications. Thank you also for this. And somebody is keeping a note of those texts. I'll try to do it if I manage.
May I put a question?
Because I'm working on my little computer and I'm not very handy with it. Can you do it, Massimiliano?
What shall I do?
Just to keep a note of those.
I tried to copy and paste, but it didn't work. So I wrote them here.
Wow. You're great. So you have a question, Massimiliano?
Yes, just a curiosity. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much, Professor Woldan, for your interesting lecture, for your speech. And then a brief question. You mentioned Vienna as the center, if I understood well, of Ukrainian immigration from 1919 to 1921. So I wanted to ask you, which were the dynamics of Ukrainian Jewish or non-Jewish immigration to Vienna, also given the topicality nowadays of such concepts as, of such terms as refugee, migrant, and so on and so forth?
Yes, I think it was still, Vienna was the old capital and it didn't lose this notion. For example, Jews leaving Eastern Galicia in large numbers, parents of Simon Wiesenthal among them, parents of Bruno Schulz. The national target was Vienna, where to go otherwise. In Vienna, they felt sure. This city would not, in any case, be occupied. Krakow could maybe have been occupied, but not Vienna. It was still the emperor alive. The emperor was more or less regarded as a friend of the Jews. The emperor Franz Joseph was regarded by the Jews as a friend for the Jewish population. So Vienna was for Jewish migration the natural goal of immigration. There are other factors. For example, Vienna is a place of studies. A lot of Ukrainian students had before World War I studied at Vienna because Lviv University was dominated by Polish professors and Polish programs and so on. So Ukrainians preferred to go to Vienna. They knew German very well because it was in the Austrian gymnasium, it was necessary, it was taught, it was the first foreign language. So no problems with language and no problems with national aspirations. In Vienna, it was equal. Are you Jew? Are you Polish? Are you Croat? A lot of people here from all different parts. So Ukrainians felt quite well when studying in Vienna, and many of them left for some years in Vienna, tried to establish themselves here. This was again a reason, a kind of continuation of Ukrainian cultural life in Vienna before and after World War first, but this changed with the situation. Austria was not the large empire any longer. It was a small nationalistic state, no other aspirations, and the new Czechoslovak state seemed to be more capable to fulfill hopes of migrations.
So Enrico Arosio just put a question, but he put a question to me directly. Probably he wanted to put it to Professor Woldan, so I can read it. Okay, he wrote, Karl-Emil Franzos, who wrote in German, defined Galician as half Asian. What do you think of this definition? I found it in some works by Austrian author Martin Pollack.
Yes. I haven't get now the sense of your question. Yes, but what concerns, you see, Pollock was the first to discover these writers again. 25 years ago, Noah Franzos, Noah Sacher-Masoch were really present. The only one who was present was Joseph Roth. The Roth Renaissance started in the 1960s, more or less, not earlier. Again, 20 years or 25 years later, one began to discover Franzos, new editions and so on, and Sacher-Masoch, very famous authors nowadays. And Pollock was one of the first. Then he knew Polish very well. He knows Polish very well. He studied Polish literature. So he introduced to this German writing authors some Polish writing, not known authors. And so he was the first to gain the renommee of the specialist on Galicia. And he is, of course, a good specialist of Galicia. He does not, or he did not know Ukrainian authors. He quoted them only a few, very few one which were existent in translations. So his literary, how to say, his literary competency on Galicia is maybe not the fullest, because there's a kind of lack of the older Ukrainian texts.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Alois, may I ask you a very personal favor, if you can? I really would like you to read one of your translated poem by Lina Kostenko, if you have it near. And well, more or less everybody understands German, so I think it
can't read it
will be a pleasure for everybody.
Give me a minute. I'm going to show if there is something.
Lina Kostenko is considered to be the most important Ukrainian poet, living poet. She's 92, I think, at the moment. She's in Kiev with her daughter, my friend Oksana Pachlowska, who is the professor of Ukrainian literature at the University of Rome, and she went to Kiev just before the war began to stay with her. And Lina Kostenko is something like a symbol for Ukraine since the how do you call it, the anti-Soviet movements of the 70s or even before. And so I think it's a nice way to conclude our meetings, to hear something.
Just a few more minutes. I'm in search of the book. I am back again.
Oh, great. Thanks.
In Ukrainian first, or only in German?
Both.
Both.
Okay.
If it's not too long.
No, short one. Yes. Sumuje chata powona wże pustka. Sumuje sad, bo wże nie zolotej. I nicz klucho nie ma osynnymi rukami, rozmawляє z mісяцем на міхах. А хмари мимо, мимо. Холодна пустка віє у димах. І місяць пиле, як обличчя мимо, трагічна маска під бровами хмар. Es klagt das Haus, beklagt die Leere. Der Garten klagt, vermisst sein goldenes Laub. Die Nacht ist stumm, ist taub, mit Herbstes Händen hält mit dem Mond sie Zwiegespräch vertraut. Und Wolken ziehen vorbei, vorbei sie ziehen, kalt tönt die Leere klagend im Kamin. Der Mond, ein weiß geschminkter Mime, wie schwarze Brauen lasten Wolken über ihm.
Sehr schön. Vielen Dank.
Bitte, bitte gerne.
So maybe Roberta, you will close the meeting.
Yeah. Thanks to all who attended to put questions, and I'm sorry that the technical obstacles hindered me a little in presenting it in a better way.
Roberta, devi accendere l'audio.
Thank you very much. So I think it worked at least. So I think everybody could hear you very, very well and put questions. So I think everything was okay. Thank you so much, Alois Woldan. It was a great pleasure to hear you and to hear about Ukraine now. And I hope we will speak again in a better situation about the same topics and think about culture, tradition, without the situation of war, of violence. So I appreciate very, very much your speech, and I hope to have the possibility to hear you again. Grazie a tutti, grazie a Laura, veramente un contributo secondo me importante oggi, sono molto felice di aver sentito Alois. Thank you so much. Allora all'anno prossimo, Massimiliano, a nuove meravigliose esperienze ed incontri.
Sicuramente.
Grazie.
Ciao, grazie a tutti, grazie a Alois, grazie a tutti. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Grazie.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.